The photo hit my phone at 2:17 a.m. Rachel, my wife of 8 years, sprawled across unfamiliar sheets with a man I'd never seen before. His arm wrapped around her waist, her lips in a smug, defiant smirk. The caption under the image simply read, "You can't stop me. I'm done hiding." Most men would have exploded, screamed, called, threatened. I didn't. I turned my phone over on the nightstand and closed my eyes. My name is Colin Dorsey. I'm 38 years old, a software architect in Denver, and I've made a living and a life by staying 10 steps ahead of chaos. I don't yell. I don't beg. I don't bluff. I calculate. Rachel always saw that as a weakness. She used to call me emotionally unavailable right before she'd go buy something reckless to fill the silence. I used to believe I was the problem. That maybe if I could just be more exciting, more spontaneous, she'd stop looking elsewhere. But the truth? She was always looking. I just stopped pretending not to see it. So I started preparing. Not 2 weeks before that smug photo hit my screen, I'd moved the last of our joint accounts into a private trust. She didn't notice. She rarely checked anything that didn't involve her face or her followers. The house? Bought it before we married. Legally, it had never been hers. Her luxury SUV? A lease under my holding company. Everything Rachel thought was ours was actually mine. Quietly. Legally. Permanently. She'd spent years thinking I was asleep at the wheel. But while she flirted with danger, I was building the firewall. So when she sent me that photo, all I felt was clarity. She had just triggered the endgame and she didn't even know it yet. Next move was mine. By 8 a.m. Rachel's world began to change and she had no idea why. The first sign came at her favorite boutique downtown. She tried to pay for a $600 pair of shoes only to have her card declined. Then again with her backup card. Confused, she called the bank. Meanwhile, I was sitting calmly in my office watching the notifications roll in automatic alerts as the accounts were frozen, cards suspended, access revoked. This wasn't done in a fit of emotion. No raised voices. No anger. Everything had been prepared months in advance, each step a line in the blueprint I'd quietly built over time. The joint credit cards? Already closed. The emergency fund she thought we shared? Moved under a private trust. The SUV she bragged about on social media? Technically leased by my consulting company. Her name had never touched the paperwork. All of it was mine. Legally. Quietly. At 10:12 a.m., my attorney filed for separation. At 11:04, Rachel was served at her favorite cafe, no less. According to the courier, she was mid-laugh when she took the envelope. The smile vanished quick. At 12:27, my phone lit up with a call from her. I didn't answer. Then came the texts. "Colin, what is this? Why are my accounts frozen? Did you actually file for separation? We need to talk. Immediately." I read each one and said nothing. She still didn't realize that while she had been performing for likes and compliments, I'd been paying attention. Not to punish her, but to protect myself from the day she decided to make a move. She had mistaken my quiet nature for passivity. What she never understood is that silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. And I had just played the first card in a very long game. Rachel had always been drawn to the spotlight even if she had to create it herself. She curated her life like a showroom. Always polished, always posed. She called it elevated living. I called it borrowed time. Because behind the filters and captions was a reality she refused to see. None of it was truly hers. That truth started catching up to her fast. By late afternoon, her luxury SUV had been towed from the valet lot where she left it, a repossession order processed that morning. The company title was in my business's name and the lease had been terminated. Clean. Legal. She called again. Then her sister texted. Rachel's in tears. She says you're punishing her. What's going on? I didn't reply. There was nothing to explain. Rachel had made a choice the moment she climbed into another man's bed and sent me a photo of it. That image was meant to break me. Instead, it confirmed what I had already known for over a year. She thought the real pain would come when she left me. But I'd already left her. Quietly. Internally. A long time ago. I still remember the moment I realized it. It was last year when she came home from a girls' trip 2 days late, smelling like expensive cologne and giving me a half-hearted excuse about canceled flights. I didn't argue. I just started planning. My strength wasn't in confrontation. It was in clarity. I watched her post brunches with friends while transferring property titles. I smiled at dinner while converting accounts into holding entities. I let her decorate the home while I made sure her name wasn't anywhere on the deed. She was playing pretend. I was preparing reality. And now reality had arrived at her doorstep and it wasn't wearing a smile. That evening she tried again, not to reach me but to reach him. The man from the photo. I didn't know much about him, didn't care to. All I needed to know was what I saw in that image, someone who thought he'd won a prize. Who smiled at my expense. Who thought he was stepping into a better life. What he didn't realize was that the luxury he saw was never Rachel's to give. The house? In my name. The car? Gone. The accounts? Closed. Rachel had walked off the cliff and taken him with her. By 9 p.m. I got a tip from my investigator. They were spotted outside a condo building arguing. He didn't let her inside. She had a small bag in her hand, no car, no ride. He left. Just like that. I'll admit, for a second I felt something. Not joy. Not satisfaction. Just pity. For how fast illusions crumble when there's no one left to prop them up. Rachel had made sure she had no backup plan. She never thought she'd need one. Because in her mind I'd always be there, quiet, patient, dependable. But even dependable men have limits. And she'd passed mine long before she ever sent that photo. At 11:22 p.m. I received her final message of the night. I don't know where to go. Can we please talk? I stared at the screen for a long moment, then locked my phone. This wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. Rachel thought I'd always be the safe place she could come back to. But safety, like trust, is earned. And she had traded both for a moment of attention. The next morning, I went through my routine like it was any other day. Coffee, gym, emails. Except this time, the silence wasn't something I endured, it was something I welcomed. Rachel had once told her friends that I wasn't expressive enough. That I didn't make big gestures. What she never understood was that I was expressive, just not in ways she valued. She liked noise. I preferred structure. She wanted spectacle. I built systems. And those systems were now protecting me from the storm she caused. I checked the security camera logs. She tried to enter the house again around 2:13 a.m. She no longer had a working code. She stood outside the front door for almost 20 minutes, staring at the handle like it owed her something. Eventually, she sat on the front steps, scrolling on her phone, making calls. None seemed to go her way. By 3 a.m., she was gone again. I forwarded the footage to my attorney. Let me guess, she wrote back. She's shocked she can't just come back. She's not used to consequences, I replied. At work, I sat through meetings, delivered reports, and shook hands as if my entire life hadn't shifted overnight. That's the part that surprises people the most. How come I stayed? But they didn't see the years that led up to this. The dinners where she barely looked up from her phone. The vacations where she posed for photos but never smiled at me. The conversations that always circled back to what I wasn't doing. I had loved Rachel once. Deeply. But love isn't enough when one person keeps taking and the other keeps folding. And now that the giving was over, she was unraveling. Still, I didn't hate her. That would have required energy I refused to spend. Because I had already begun something far more important than revenge. I was building my life back, and this time, nothing in it would be pretend. By Friday afternoon, the word had spread. Mutual friends, the ones Rachel kept close when it was convenient, started reaching out. Carefully. Quietly. Hey man, just heard you and Rachel are taking a break. Hope you're doing okay. Saw some weird stuff on Rachel's social media, let me know if you need anything. Funny how people who cheered her on when she flaunted our life now suddenly disappeared when things got uncomfortable. No more brunch photos. No more spa days. No more birthday trips she could post for applause. Rachel had built her identity around appearances. Without them, she was adrift. And it wasn't just her friends who were backing away. Her family, who once praised her ambition and charm, grew silent too. I heard through my attorney that Rachel had called her parents for help. They suggested she work things out with me. Not because they cared about our marriage, but because they knew what Rachel refused to see. She didn't have a safety net without me. I had spent years building a life. Rachel spent years building a facade. And now when it mattered, her facade crumbled and no one came to help. Late that night, another text came through. Colin, please. I made mistakes. I see that now. We can fix this. I sat with that message for a while. Not out of temptation, but because I wanted to feel something. Anything. Pity. Sadness. Even anger. But there was nothing left. Rachel wasn't reaching out because she loved me. She was reaching out because she had lost everything she thought she controlled and she believed she could talk her way back. But there are some things you can't rebuild with apologies. Trust. Respect. Stability. She had sold those things for attention long before the first lie, the first affair, the first photo she smugly sent at 2:17 a.m. And now the only person Rachel needed was the one man she had taught herself to treat as disposable. It didn't take long for Rachel to realize her second mistake. The first had been betrayal. The second was assuming the man she left me for would catch her when she fell. He didn't. According to my investigator, he blocked her number 2 days after the car was towed. She'd shown up at his apartment building again, only to be turned away by his roommate. Apparently, he had a new girlfriend already. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I just watched the pattern unfold exactly as I knew it would. Rachel had spent years floating on borrowed comfort. Borrowed money, borrowed status, borrowed name. Now all of it was gone. She tried staying with a friend, one of those socialites she used to tag in every photo. But friends like that don't open their homes for long when there's no party, no perks, and no social gain. She lasted 3 nights there before getting asked to leave. At this point, she had no car, no access to funds, and no legal claim to anything I owned. Everything had been tied up cleanly and completely long before she ever hit send on that reckless photo. And yet, she kept reaching out. We were a team once, Colin. Doesn't that mean anything to you? You don't have to forgive me. Just help me get back on my feet. I know I hurt you. But you don't need to do this to me. But I hadn't done anything to her. I had simply stepped away and let her choices speak for themselves. Rachel had built her house of cards on my foundation and then mocked the man holding it up. She thought she was clever. Untouchable. In control. Now she was sleeping on someone's couch with no exit plan, no backup, and no one left to manipulate. And for once she couldn't spin it. Not online. Not to friends. Not to family. Because everyone had seen her smiling when she lit the match. And no one wanted to stand too close once the fire started spreading. On Sunday afternoon, she showed up in person. Not at the house, she knew better than that, but outside the gated entrance of my office building. Security caught her pacing, talking on her phone, then trying to tailgate an employee through the turnstile. They called me. I told them the same thing as before. No entry. No exceptions. She didn't fight them this time. She just stood there, looking hollow. That evening, she sent one last message, this one longer than usual. I know you think I don't deserve your help. Maybe you're right. But I've lost everything. I'm not asking to come back. Just to stop sinking. I can't fix this without you. Still, I didn't respond. This was the part Rachel had never prepared for. Not rejection, she'd dealt with that before, always managing to spin it, repackage it into sympathy from someone else. No. This was the part where the world didn't react the way she wanted it to. No applause. No pity. Just silence. Because without the filters, the poses, the borrowed lifestyle, Rachel was just another person learning that actions have weight and consequences. I'd spent years trying to reach her, trying to talk through the distance, suggesting counseling, offering my time, my energy, my loyalty. She answered with sarcasm, with secrets, with slow detachment masked as independence. She used to say I was too quiet, that I never made grand gestures. But what she never realized is that leaving her life was the loudest thing I ever did. Now every door she once walked through with pride was closed. And in that stillness, that unfamiliar silence, she had to face the one thing she'd never truly looked at. Herself. No more distractions. No more backup plans. Just a mirror. And for the first time in her life, Rachel had no choice but to see what she'd become. Rachel stopped calling. No more texts. No voicemails. No surprise visits. The silence should have felt eerie. Instead, it felt finished. My attorney informed me she'd finally responded to the separation paperwork. No contest. No demands. No objections. Just a signature. That told me more than words ever could. She had finally realized she had no hand left to play. Still, I wasn't celebrating. This wasn't victory. It was closure, the kind that doesn't come with balloons or announcements, just clean lines and quiet resolve. I took a long walk that night. Through the neighborhood we once called home. The trees were starting to change color, shedding the past. It felt fitting. Neighbors nodded as I passed. A few probably knew what had happened. Most didn't. And I didn't need them to. Because this wasn't a story I needed to tell. Not anymore. Rachel had spent her entire life trying to be seen. I had spent mine building a life worth keeping. And in the end, only one of us still had something to hold on to. From what I heard, she was bouncing between temporary stays, a friend here, a cousin there. No steady work. No permanent address. Just fragments. Even the people who once gassed her up online had gone quiet. Turns out, attention fades quickly when there's no luxury to wrap it in. And when you've burned enough bridges, Eventually there's no one left to wave from the other side. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her harm. But I did let her disappear, not out of cruelty but necessity. Because some people don't need to be destroyed. They simply need to be left alone long enough to erase themselves. It was a Tuesday when I got the email from the realtor. Subject line: Inquiry from Rachel Dorsey, former spouse of record. Apparently, Rachel had contacted them, asking whether the house, my house, was going to be listed. She said she wanted a heads up, so she could prepare emotionally. The realtor forwarded the message to me out of courtesy, adding, "Didn't realize she thought she had a claim." She didn't, and deep down I think she knew that too. But this was her pattern. Show up late, pretend it was her stage, and hope someone was still clapping. I didn't respond to the email. Instead, I called my attorney to ensure a final notice was sent confirming, again, that she had no legal interest in any property, vehicle, or account. She'd signed off on everything. And yet, she still circled back like she might find something left untouched. What she didn't understand was that every room, every wall, every line of this life had been scrubbed clean of her. She'd lost the car months ago. She'd lost the house when she walked out of it. She lost access to the bank accounts the same day she sent that photo, smug and smiling, thinking she held the upper hand. She didn't, because long before she made it public, I had already made it final. The only thing she ever truly owned was the betrayal. Everything else? She borrowed it. My name, my loyalty, my work, and she traded it all for a cheap thrill and a man who ran the moment the glitter faded. The thing about building a life quietly, patiently, and legally is that when the storm comes, you're the only one left standing. And now, Rachel was just beginning to understand what she had really lost. Not the house, not the money, but the one man who would have done anything for her, if she hadn't made it a competition. A week passed before I heard from her again. This time it wasn't a text. It was a letter handwritten, folded neatly, mailed in a plain envelope. No return address, but I knew the handwriting. I'd seen it on birthday cards, on notes she used to leave by the coffee machine before her smile changed. Inside it started like this: Colin, I don't know how to make sense of what's happened. I don't expect forgiveness. But I need to tell you a few things before everything disappears completely. She went on about confusion, loneliness, pressure. She said she'd gotten carried away, that she thought I'd never leave, that she assumed I'd always be there, no matter how far she drifted. You never yelled. You never fought back. I thought that meant you didn't care. But now I see it meant you were done long before I realized you were gone. There was no blame this time. No excuses. Just regret. You gave me everything, and I mocked it. I thought I needed more. What I didn't see was that I already had everything I claimed I wanted. I folded the letter carefully and slid it into a drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but because it was the only honest thing she'd given me in years. Still, it changed nothing. Her words couldn't undo what she'd done. And her tears, however real, came far too late. Sometimes, people don't realize what they had until they lose the person who held it all together. But that's the thing about time, it moves forward. Not out of cruelty, but because it must. Rachel was finally facing what it felt like to live in the world she'd created. One where image mattered more than loyalty, where attention was valued over truth. And now that the lights were off and the audience had left, she was sitting alone in a silence she never imagined would stay. The letter stayed in that drawer. I never replied. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't need to. Rachel wasn't fighting anymore. She wasn't plotting or pretending or pushing. She was finally quiet. And in that silence, I think she heard herself for the first time. Friends I hadn't spoken to in years started reaching out. They'd seen the change. Some of them told me Rachel had been reaching out too, not for help, but for validation. Hoping someone would tell her I'd gone too far. That I was cruel. No one did. Because I hadn't destroyed her. She'd done it to herself, slowly, consistently, while smiling through every bad decision and assuming the bill would never come due. Now it had. One former friend told me Rachel was living in a one-bedroom apartment near the edge of town. No car. Working part-time at a place she used to mock retail. The kind of job she once swore she was too good for. I didn't feel triumphant. But I did feel something close to peace. Because while Rachel had spent our marriage chasing sparkle, I had been building substance. I worked long hours, skipped nights out, saved carefully. I planned for the future while she lived for the next photo. She used to laugh at how boring I was. Called me old-fashioned. Too steady. But funny thing about steady? It doesn't shatter when the winds pick up. Now I was still here. In the same house. Same job. Same routine. Only now without the weight of pretending to hold a partnership together alone. And the woman who said she was done hiding had been fully exposed not by scandal but by her own choices. Everything she once showed off? Gone. And everything she once took for granted? Still standing without her. I received a call from Rachel's old employer. It surprised me not because they called but because they asked if I'd be willing to provide a character reference. Apparently Rachel had applied for a full-time position there. Said she was trying to start fresh. The woman on the phone was polite, careful. I understand you're separated, she said. We just want to get a full picture. I could have destroyed her in one sentence. I could have told them about the betrayal, the financial deceit, the way she left our marriage with nothing but arrogance and a suitcase of lies. But I didn't. Instead, I said, she's resourceful, determined, learns quickly. I hope she finds what she's looking for. Because I wasn't after humiliation. I was after resolution. And I already had it. The next morning, I followed through on something I'd quietly planned for weeks. I signed the final property transfer, turning the holding company that owned our former joint assets into a personal trust with me as the sole beneficiary. It wasn't to hide anything. It was to close the loop. Now, there were no threads left. No signatures left dangling. No access points to come crawling back through. It was done. That afternoon, I stood in the empty guest room, once hers, and opened the last drawer of the old dresser. Inside, I found a few forgotten things. A bracelet. A dried-out lipstick. A small Polaroid of us from years ago, laughing. I didn't feel regret. Just stillness. Because the truth is, I had already mourned this relationship long before it ended. I'd just done it silently. Now, the grief was gone. The dust settled. All that remained was a calm, steady awareness of everything I'd protected and everything she lost by not valuing it. Rachel thought she'd broken me. But all she did was give me permission to rebuild. This time without her. I didn't hear from Rachel for nearly a month after the letter. Then, just before the final court date, she reached out one last time. A message polite, rehearsed. Would you be open to meeting for coffee before everything's finalized? Just to talk. No pressure. It was the kind of message that sounds harmless on the surface. But I knew her patterns. She wasn't after closure. She was testing the door one last time, hoping it might be unlocked. I never responded. Instead, I showed up to court alone, on time, and calm. She arrived 10 minutes late, hair tied back, sunglasses on. A shadow of the woman who once insisted on centerpieces and champagne for a casual dinner party. She barely looked at me as she sat across the aisle, folding her hands like she could pray the moment away. It was quick. Clean. The judge reviewed the uncontested separation agreement. No property disputes. No alimony. No entanglements left to unravel. Rachel said nothing. When it was over, she stood up, lingered for a second like she wanted to say something but didn't. She walked out without a word. And that was the moment I knew the revenge was complete, not through bitterness, not through spectacle, but through total silence. Because for someone like Rachel, who lived through image, through attention, through control, nothing is more devastating than being truly, fully dismissed. Not hated. Not cursed. Just forgotten. And while she now lived in the echo of what she'd thrown away, I walked out of that courtroom feeling something rare. Freedom. The kind that doesn't come from escape, but from survival. 3 weeks after the court finalized everything, a package arrived at Rachel's last known address. I didn't send it myself, my attorney handled it as we'd planned. No return label. Just a simple manila envelope with 2 documents inside. The first was a certified letter confirming the final revocation of all shared financial authorizations, accounts she had quietly clung to for years without realizing she no longer had access. A clean audit trail. No loose ends. The second? A photocopy of the smug photo she had once sent me. The one where she thought she'd ended everything. Back then it was meant to wound. Now it sat under a stamped heading that read, Exhibit A, Grounds for Divorce, Dorsey versus Dorsey. Her own pride framed as evidence in her own undoing. There was no message attached. No note. No insult. Because the point was never about revenge through anger. It was about making sure she understood, really understood, that while she had laughed at my silence, mocked my steadiness, and paraded her betrayal as power, She had actually handed me everything I needed. And I never raised my voice. Never made a scene. Never chased after her or begged her to stay. Because I knew the best way to deal with someone who turns your loyalty into leverage is to let them believe they've won. Until they realize they walked straight into the consequences they never thought applied to them. Today, I live in peace. My home is quiet again. My accounts are mine. My time is my own. There's no tension, no secrets, no staged smiles. Just clarity. Rachel? She exists somewhere on the edges now. No longer on the pedestal she built for herself. No more luxury, no followers cheering her on. Just a long, slow look in the mirror with no one left to blame but herself. And me? I didn't ruin her. She did that all by herself. I just made sure there was nothing left to take when she was done. And that right there was justice.